Hello, and welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm John Bizzell, WARC's lead for all things awards, and today we've got some choice morsels for you. We're going to be talking about the winners of the Cannes Lions for creative strategy. We're recording this in the WARC studio on the very last day of the week-long Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, and whilst you may be listening from a safe distance, for me and today's guests, the creative strategy winners were announced just last night at an awards show. So retreating into this soundproof room for half an hour is actually quite healing. Those guests then. So on my left, jury president Pats McDonald, who is Global Chief Strategy Officer at Dentsu Creative. And on my right, jury member Yusuf Chuku, Executive Strategy Director at New Gods. Pats and Yusuf, welcome to the WARC Podcast.
Thank you.
Hello.
Now, having said this is an international festival of creativity, I seem to have contrived to have three UK voices on the podcast, but I should stress that the jury was, truly global and diverse. So I'm going to come to you first, Pats. I know you've judged Lions before and indeed for the WARC Awards some years ago, but how did you find leading such a diverse global team?
It sounds like a cliche, but it's genuinely a huge privilege. And one of my favourite things in the world is talking about strategy and ideas with smart people. And that's what being on a jury at Cannes is all about. And those diverse perspectives were incredibly valuable. So whenever we had work from a region that we weren't sure about the cultural resonance, we had, generally speaking, someone in the room who could say, let me explain why, the caramello dog means so much to Brazilians. We had brilliant perspectives on the Middle Eastern region. So those perspectives were so valuable and so illuminating around the work that it genuinely was a delight.
Yeah. And Yusuf, of course, you're a veteran judge for the WARC Awards. I think 3 years I've lured you into doing it and even chaired 1 year. So how was... But I think this is your first time in Cannes, right?
It is,
being
yes.
a judge. Yes.
Yes.
So, look, how was that for you, and how was Pat as a president?
Oh, amazing times two. It was super good. I think it's all credit to Pat. It's very hard to keep a whole load of very opinionated strategists on course and focused, but she was able to do that. But at the same time, encourage kind of really robust conversation. So I love the fact that as a team, we were able to diverge and then come together. But to hear all the opinions, I think one of the things that struck me probably the most was like the generosity of the people around the table. And so it's interesting. You always, as someone having previously entered, you always kind of think that if they don't like it, they're going to just dismiss it immediately, move on to the next thing. And actually, it's probably quite the opposite. We probably spent more time on the weaker cases because you'd read it once, you're discussing like actually. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I didn't catch it the first time. So let me read it again and try and find the brilliance. And so I was so impressed by just people being so generous with their time, trying to find sort of the best work and taking that task really seriously.
I think that's a really nice thing to get across to entrants as well, right? Like the dedication that goes into reviewing this work. Nothing is just casually discarded to be. So that's why being even shortlisted is such a huge achievement, never mind working your way up those metals.
Actually, I am going to go back and sort of polish off my shortlist from previous years. I newfound pride in that. So, yes.
Well, look, before we get into some of those winners in more detail, I'd love to start by touching on the process, Pat. So I've seen you talk elsewhere during the festival about these 4 A's that you had and that you briefed the jury with. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we had 4 A's. We talked about work that knows the audience, just brilliant, intimate, human-to-human insight, the kind of thing that you cannot possibly automate or replicate. We talked about knowing the algorithm, which is really understanding how work travels through the modern media ecosystem without just chasing the latest hashtag or the latest meme. We talked about work that connects AI and human craft to do things that wouldn't be possible, that aren't about being more efficient. They're about doing things that were never possible before. And the most important, and actually I came to this one the more I read the cases, is ambition. Is this case trying to do something that looks really difficult?
Interesting. So, having been given that brief, Yusuf, did it work in practice as a juror? Did that help guide the choices you made?
Immensely. At a certain point, you're going to have to sort of make some hard decisions, and so I think having some really clear criteria to kind of structure and organise that conversation and that decision was vital. No, yeah, really helpful.
Great. Well, whilst you were in your room, I was across the hall this year in the creative effectiveness judging, and we recorded another podcast with those jurors, so please go back and check that out in the feed if you haven't heard it yet. But what I'm keen to get across to listeners is the important differences between these two categories. And Pats, I remember you saying way back in the jury briefing call that we had, weeks before we got to Cannes, that you wanted the team to keep coming back to whether the work they were looking at would have come about without the strategy behind it. So, you really wanted to say, can we see how strategy has intervened here, how it's intercepted the customer? And of course, there are all sorts of ways that strategy can make a difference. So I'd love to know, of the winners you chose, what were the great examples of that in the end?
So we tried to make sure that all the work, that was the very practical criteria we gave ourselves in the room, stepping back from the more conceptual sort of 4As, was, is the strategy core? Is the strategy clear? Is there a real world impact? And I think the best work really had that. So work that I loved, that I know Yusuf's also a big fan of, 3 Words by AXA. It was just extraordinary. And, I think when you're debating creative strategy, you can get into a little bit of a rabbit hole of, what do the strategists do? What do the creative do? I don't think that matters that much anymore. It's a brilliant strategic solution to a really urgent problem. So I thought that was a brilliant piece of work I was deeply envious of. I love Daisy versus Scammers as well. That's the work with the AI-enabled grammar, which it just intercepts the scammer who is a real problem at a really important point. And that idea of setting a gossipy virtual grandma to distract and waste time, I thought was just so brilliant, particularly when so many old people are targeted and made to feel vulnerable and unsafe.
Yeah, we've talked about that campaign on the podcast before. I think it's really, really great. What about you, Yusuf? What were your favourite kind of strategic manifestations, let's say, in the work?
I think probably the sign of like how happy I was with the outcome of where we got to is that I love them all. So it wasn't, I could point to the sort of brilliance in each of them. I think maybe 2 that haven't been recognised. And actually, do you know what? There's it's funny, in Cannes we talk a lot about craft, but we always sort of talk about it with respect to kind of the creative work, the creative craft. But there is a sort of craft to strategy. And I think there are a few cases where it wasn't like it was, it wasn't like you think about it as like this modern breakthrough thought, but it was just our craft done really, really well. And when you do strategy really well, it has a difference. So it makes a difference. So you think about like the Cheetos work, and it was just this simple idea of how do you take this product flaw and turn it into a distinctive brand asset in the kind of the Cheetos on the fingers. So just a simple turn, but genius. And then that unlocked kind of like a whole host of like plethora of kind of creativity. Or the same with Dramamine, which is kind of like, okay, we kind of want to make an effectiveness and a superiority claim, but actually let's look at the thing that we sort of drove out of business, which is kind of unfortunately kind of the world of bath bag collecting, which is again this super micro niche thing, but just such a fun way of kind of turning what is just essentially a sort of standard product claiming to something quite brilliant. And it was sort of the strategic thinking that made the difference.
Right. Well, let's get to AI, because you did mention it as one of your 4As, or rather the ambition to connect AI with human craft. So was that ambition there in the work, and more importantly, was it realised?
Yes, I think we had some of our goals, I think, used AI in an absolutely extraordinary way. So the new president won a gold, and it created an AI president, because the country had been without a president for so long. There was so much complexity around the election, and the AI president ingested decades worth of the newspaper and was therefore able to offer really intelligent, balanced view on the issues of the day. So I thought that was just so smart, so provocative. There was also a piece of work called humanimals, which that's the first time I've managed to say that. So winning, which it used big data and it tracked the migration patterns of animals. The insight was really charming. It was that Colombia is the favoured destination for animals to migrate, but not such a popular tourist destination for humans. So they tracked those migratory patterns of animals. And as, those animals were coming into view, they trigger real-time advertising to say, I'm visiting, why aren't you? Which I thought was just so smart and so delightful.
Yeah. I think we need to get that. The AI president and the AI granny can be our next podcast guests.
I love
perhaps.
that.
I'm going to come to you next, Yusuf, because something you said in that jury briefing was that we need to remember that strategy is not about using culture, but rather understanding it. And so we don't necessarily want to see work that's just jumping on trends or exploiting culture. Were there some nice examples of that from the winners that you chose?
Yeah, I think, and so essentially you can sort of think about culture in sort of two ways. You kind of have like big macro trends and sort of slow moving shifts in culture, and then you kind of have sort of this fast moving kind of stuff that's found in kind of subreddits and all that. And so what I loved is we kind of had work that was able to kind of understand and utilize sort of at those different altitudes. So if I think about kind of the stuff that comes out of subreddits, it's Friday.
Yes.
Friday, end of can. I'm never going to get my words out.
And Pat's already bested you by doing humanimals.
I know. I should just practice simply saying subreddit.
Simply saying subreddit is quite a tongue twister.
I'm not going to say it again. But the work CeraVe and sort of the Michael CeraVe work, it was so clever. But it comes from this like really niche place. Like you're going to have to go quite deep into to Reddit to kind of find a lot where that conversation was happening. But for a brand to kind of recognize that, see the opportunity, and then bring it in and take it and make it this sort of big driver of a campaign, it's genius. Loved it. At the same time, the Princess and the Crown work and understanding the importance of, and again, being a father of a black daughter, kind of an issue that's close to my heart and the importance of hair and what it represents and having pride in your hair, like big cultural issue. And so for a brand to kind of go in there and champion and understand the importance and the power of it, I think was great.
And do it well.
And do it really well, exactly.
That sort of work can be very easy to
And I think this is where the sort of the role of strategy and sometimes the strategist comes in to kind of like understand that part of culture and how you kind of enter the conversation or the culture kind of in the correct way. That requires kind of like diligence and it sort of takes good strategy to kind of understand how to do that without messing up.
So we've talked about a few campaigns there, but we have not yet mentioned the Grand Prix. So let's get onto that. Why was this the eventual best of the best, and what made it stand out to you, Pats?
Well, I keep saying this, but it's always true. It really has been the playbook for modern strategy for over 20 years. So, Dove, Campaign for Real Beauty, it was really the first brand to embrace purpose, but link it absolutely indelibly to their product. And it's remained extraordinarily consistent over the years, but it's managed to constantly reinvent itself, constantly find new cultural tensions, new technologies to leverage. It's got that really wonderful combination of being quite fearless about how it embraces technology, but also having these little micro human insights at the heart that come from observing women and girls and how they look at themselves in the mirror or how they present themselves on social media. So it's just extraordinary how that brand has just never rested on its laurels. It's never gotten lazy about the sharpness of the insights or the pressure to innovate. So it really is an incredibly well-deserved Grand Prix.
Anything to add there, Yusuf?
I think probably covered it pretty well. But I actually, I was in a talk, Mark Ritson, and obviously guaranteed he's going to kind of have some pretty strong points of view.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And what was interesting, he kind of, and again, I don't want to get into a fight with him. He's going to come at me on LinkedIn.
But I don't know if he listens, to be honest.
But like, he made a big point of kind of going, and as part of his presentation, and that's why sort of purpose is dead. Like brands are wasting their time. And I think what's really interesting about the Dove case is it kind of goes, actually, you can take purpose and you can turn that into something that's distinctive to your brand. You can stick to it over a long period of time, and you can use it to drive emotion. And these were the sort of the three tenets he talked about in terms of like how you actually kind of make successful brands and effective advertising. And Dove does all those three things with purpose. And so it's just super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, Grand Prix for strategy.
And there's not a strategist around that wouldn't love to have been saying, like, I'm the person that came up with that. Like, it's great.
Well, even though we've sort of crawled to the end of Cannes Week, unbelievably, there will already be people thinking about their entries for next year, perhaps inspired by this very conversation. So I'd love to get any insight from you that you would share to these potential entrants. You know, either from what you've read, what makes a great creative strategy entry, or even maybe what could entrants do better for you? Yusuf, why don't you take this one first?
I think that, and sort of Pats has sort of said it already, but just making sure the strategy is clear is like, I can't kind of say how important that is, particularly when, you know, you have to think about kind of the juror who's probably read a few hundred cases. And so you're going to have to kind of make it as simple for them to understand as possible. But also what you're doing when you write your papers, you're kind of recruiting advocates. And so to ensure that someone can defend your case, they need to understand your case. And so you kind of think about it as like, I'm not necessarily writing this to convince someone. I'm kind of writing this to arm someone to convince someone else. And it's a different, it's like just a slightly different twist, but it's important. It ensures that you are giving them all the ammo that they need to fight the battle on your behalf.
Great advice. Pats?
I totally agree with that. I think we had lots of really great creative work in our category where we just couldn't see the role of strategy. And it almost felt quite heretical to say that work is not getting an award because it is outstanding creatively, but we couldn't really identify the role for strategy. It felt quite tactical or quite reactive. So I think how you craft the entry so that that strategy sings out is key. Exactly as Yusuf said, that someone in the room can advocate for you and go, no, that was the strategy. I always remember last year writing our KPN submission, which was last year's Grand Prix. We went over and over and over the language until it was so tight that we could say there is nothing shameful about sexting. What is shameful is forwarding images without consent. And you just sort of go, boom, that's easy to pass on and point at and go, that was the pivot right there. I think also thinking about how you're using insight and research in a really creative way. It's not the only thing that makes a great strategy case, but if the jury can point at something really interesting, an interesting way you crunched the data or spoke to a customer or looked at a subreddit, it really helps them see, okay, I get it. The strategist worked hard on this one. There's no kind of post-rationalization on this one.
Yeah, the strategist's fingerprints. I like that idea of like, you can really see what they did here. Okay, so I'm going to end. Sometimes people find this a hard question, and Yusuf, you've already said that you would love to have worked on the Dove campaign, but as that was the Grand Prix, I'm not going to let you have it. But if there was one other piece of work that you looked at this year that you wish that you'd worked on, what would it have been and why?
Oh, AXA.
Yeah.
It's so good because it works both ways. It kind of it goes back into the business, amends policy. So like changing the words in those contracts, convincing underwriters and actuaries that like this is the right thing to do. I can only imagine how hard that was. But it made it made a substantial change to the business that had a real world impact. Created allowed for some great work. It's just super good, but so simple, so really easy to articulate. It wasn't hard for anyone to understand what the strategy was, how they got there, and so it's great.
What about you, Pat?
Well, I love that one as well, but since I knew you were going to say that, I also really love the Sounds Right campaign, which was that collaboration between Spotify and the UN to recognise Mother Nature as an artist in her own right, contributing to all sorts of music tracks and making those tracks available, and that kind of constant revenue going to sustainability charities. I just thought it's so smart because it's ongoing royalty revenue in perpetuity. makes a really interesting point. It's beautifully creative, but actually the business model behind it I thought was really smart.
Great. Well, that I think will inspire a few people to read those campaigns and indeed everything you selected as winners this year, which they can do right now on Love the Work and soon on WARC.com. Well, look, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us today and give us a little glimpse behind that jury room door. I think with that, we're going to wrap things up. Listeners, thank you for joining us. You can check out the podcast feed for a whole week of content that the team curated here in Cannes, talking to some of the speakers that have been mentioned by my guests today and a lot more. And don't forget to subscribe for more news and views from WARC. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.